He wrote, quote, "Capitalism is premised on the accumulation of capital, but under perfect competition, all profits get competed away," end quote. So he's saying that if companies want to maintain profits, they have to establish monopolies. Therefore, capitalism inherently tends toward the creation of monopolies. He concluded this article in the Wall Street Journal writing, quote, "Monopoly is the condition of every successful business," end quote. And then finally, quote, "All happy companies are different. Each one earns a monopoly by solving a unique problem. All failed companies are the same. They failed to escape competition," end quote. Now, again, I need to emphasize that Peter Thiel is a major funder of politicians from the Republican Party, and he's personally very close to President Donald Trump. Trump's vice president, J.D. Vance, worked for Peter Thiel, and when J.D. Vance ran for Senate in Ohio in 2022, Peter Thiel funded his campaign with $15 million. And Peter Thiel and Elon Musk have been friends and business partners going back decades. In fact, Thiel and Musk are both part of what's known as the PayPal Mafia, which is a loose group of Silicon Valley tech capitalists, and several of them are very important figures in the Donald Trump camp, including David Sachs, another Silicon Valley oligarch who was nominated by Trump to be the White House czar for AI and crypto. So what all of this shows is that the United States has become more and more of an oligarchy controlled by a small handful of billionaire oligarchs who became insanely wealthy by establishing monopolies. Now, this certainly isn't new in the history of the United States. If you go back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, U.S. society was dominated by the robber barons. These were capitalist oligarchs who today would have wealth similar to people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. And they controlled the metalworking industries like steel and iron. They controlled the oil industry. They controlled the railroads and the coal industry. These were powerful capitalist oligarchs like John D. Rockefeller and Cornelius Vanderbilt. But what happened is in the progressive era of U.S. politics, the U.S. government passed antitrust laws and broke up many of these monopolies. And in recent decades, new monopolies have established that have become more and more powerful and control the government. And as Peter Thiel wrote in his Wall Street Journal article, this is an inevitable feature of capitalism. Even Karl Marx recognized it in the third volume of Capital back in the 19th century, that capitalism inherently tends toward monopolies, and if the government does not discipline and control the capitalist class and prevent the consolidation of monopolies, they will take control over everything, which is exactly what we've seen in the United States. As Peter Thiel pointed out, if you actually have competition, what happens is that over time, profits fall and they get competed away. In fact, Karl Marx wrote about this in the 19th century. He referred to it as the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. That is that over time, as there's more competition, firms have to reduce their production costs lower and lower and reduce their profit margins. So what happens is that companies invest more and more in capital and they employ less and less labor. So there's less surplus value extracted from labor, which is the source of profits. Marx referred to this as the organic composition of capital. That is, over time, there's more and more investment in capital. Industries become more and more capital intensive, less labor intensive. As machines are used to automate the production process, profit margins become razor thin and they eventually disappear unless a company can establish a monopoly. And if a company can destroy all of its competitors, it can maintain monopoly profits. This explains why in China, which has a socialist system run by a communist party, but they have a socialist market economy, it's not completely planned like the Soviet Union. In fact, in many ways, China is following a more orthodox understanding of Marxism, going back to Marx itself, which understands that you have to have these market forces in order to push down profits, that this is an inherent part of the development of the productive forces in order to eventually develop socialism. China is following that, exactly what Marx wrote about in the 19th century. And what is happening in China? China has incredibly competitive internal markets with dozens and hundreds of different companies competing with each other. For instance, in the electric vehicle industry, there are dozens of different companies creating electric vehicles. And what happened? The cost of electric vehicles plummeted. These companies are producing EVs with razor thin margins. They're some of the best EVs in the world, and they're extremely cheap. They cost like 10,000 US dollars. Meanwhile, Tesla vehicles, because there's basically almost no competition in the US against Tesla EVs. So Tesla has a monopoly and they charge high monopoly rents, and their cars are 5 or 6 times more expensive than Chinese EVs. So the US government puts tariffs on Chinese EVs to prevent China from competing with US monopolies. And meanwhile, the Western financial press complains that in China, corporate profits are constantly falling. And they complain about deflation in China. But the reason that there's deflation in China is that the price of consumer goods continues to fall because there's so much internal competition. Because the socialist Chinese system actually understands the importance of having competition among corporations to prevent the creation of monopolies. But what China does is the government provides certain support for strategic industries, and it creates plans. So every 5 years, the Communist Party publishes a 5-year plan, and then the government publishes other separate plans for strategic industries. For instance, in 2020, they announced the plan for high quality development of new energy vehicles from 2021 to 2035. And the government provides incentives and subsidies and invests in infrastructure. And these companies compete according to the government plan. And then they bring profits down to zero and they create the best possible products for the lowest possible price. And now this is what China is doing in artificial intelligence. China is using its state-owned banks to provide very cheap loans to AI companies. So then AI companies will compete with each other to produce the best possible models, the best possible technological breakthroughs in research. So in US capitalism, what you get is large corporate monopolies that control everything. The government privatizes everything, sells them off to monopolies, and then they charge monopoly rents. Everything is insanely expensive, and the US can't produce anything because it's been deindustrialized and the economy's been financialized and controlled by Wall Street. In Chinese socialism, what you get is something completely different. The government has state ownership of the natural monopolies. So instead of allowing capitalists to create monopolies, the Chinese government owns the banking system, the telecommunications infrastructure, the energy grid, metalworking, mines, infrastructure development. All of those industries are controlled by state-owned enterprises. But in other industries where China wants innovation, especially in technology, the government incentivizes competition among different companies to reduce the cost of production, to make the best possible products for the lowest possible price, preventing the creation of monopolies, whereas the US government is encouraging the creation of monopolies. These systems are complete opposites. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this is what explains Washington's new Cold War on China. It is the US government's attempt to protect all of its corporate monopolies, to protect its billionaire oligarchs who fund politicians from both parties, and to destroy the Chinese socialist model and save the US capitalist model in the world. Because US capitalism cannot compete internationally with Chinese socialism around the world. But if it destroys China, then US monopolies can dominate the entire global market.